Hey everybody, my name is Kevin Pira. I am a certified financial planner, and today I'm reacting to you can live off $500,000 in the bank and do nothing else. This video is by Chris Invest, so shout out to him for his work here that we're reacting to. Let's go ahead and find out, is $500,000 enough to retire? Let's go.
What amount of money would you say it takes for someone to be wealthy or at least comfortable? For some, the number might be in the millions. But Kevin O'Leary, entrepreneur and investor known for his blunt style on Shark Tank, suggests that the amount needed is much less than what most people think. This is especially surprising coming from someone like O'Leary, whose net worth is estimated to be around $400 million. He's built his wealth through a combination of business ventures, smart investing, and a well-developed personal brand. Yet even with that level of success, O'Leary often emphasizes a surprisingly modest approach to money and financial independence. You don't need tens of millions of dollars to stop working, to travel, or to live comfortably. What you do need is clarity. Clarity about your own lifestyle preferences, your priorities, and what truly makes you feel secure and fulfilled. Once you understand...
Yes, that's absolutely true. You need to figure out what exactly your goals are. There's a lot of other things you need to figure out too, which we'll jump into. But did anybody else binge watch a lot of Shark Tank back in the day, or still does? Because that's how I really got introduced to Kevin O'Leary's, was his hot takes and whatnot on Shark Tank. So let's go ahead and see if his retirement advice is just as good as his hot takes in Shark Tank.
What kind of life you actually want to live, you can start figuring out how much it costs to sustain it. For some people, that vision includes luxury cars, designer clothes, and sprawling real estate. A life of opulence and enjoying the finest things money can buy. For others, it's about peace of mind, like not having to worry about making sure the bills are paid. Modest comforts, like a small, well-kept home, and control over their time, so they aren't tied down by a 9-to-5 and are free to travel, spend time with family, and not have to worry about maintaining an image and keeping up with a bunch of stuff. These two visions come with very different price tags, and that's exactly why Kevin O'Leary believes the amount of money it takes to feel financially free is often much less than most people assume. It's not about a specific number, it's about aligning your spending with what actually matters to you. O'Leary says you can quit working and live comfortably with $500,000 in the bank, as long as you manage it smartly. That might sound like a stretch at first. How can anyone live off such a small amount when the returns seem so tiny? But once you actually look at the numbers, it starts to make a lot more sense. According to O'Leary, if you take that $500,000 and put it into fixed income investments, bonds, high-yield savings products, and other low-risk investments, it's reasonable to expect a return of about 5% per year. That works out to $25,000 in annual income, generated passively.
So 5% return for fixed income is not that crazy right now, but the question is it always going to return 5%? It could be higher or substantially lower than that in the future. So if you're going to use a 5% return going forward, you do need to be very careful about projecting that or just using that just fixed income in your portfolio, obviously due to inflation and the fact that those numbers can very easily change. So let's go ahead and see what ways he's going to fix that, because you definitely don't want to live off just 100% fixed income with a $500,000 portfolio unless you truly have extremely low cost. Paid off house, low healthcare costs or very little healthcare costs, and pretty low spending as well in a low cost of living area. It's doable, definitely, but I would be cautious about going all in on fixed income. So let's see what exactly he's going to say here about this.
You don't need to spend the principal. You're simply living off the interest. He goes on to say that for those willing to accept more market risk and invest part of that $500,000 into equities, like stocks or ETFs, the potential return increases. O'Leary points out that it's possible to earn closer to 8.5% or 9% annually with a balanced portfolio that includes both stocks and bonds. That would produce...
So 8.5%, 9%, that's pretty aggressive for a forward-looking projection. Again, that's nominal, so we're talking about before inflation. So that would be more in line with like a 100% equity portfolio, or maybe even like 95-5 or 90-10. That would definitely be, definitely a lot higher than the normal 60-40 portfolio that a lot of people are out there using or recommended. If you're going to make a forward projection on a nominal basis, so before inflation, and you're talking about not being 100% equities, you're probably looking around 6 to 7% at the most, really. So I would be a little careful about using that high of a rate of return projected going forward. Is it possible? Of course. But you do need to be very careful and probably more conservative when you're making a projection that needs to last 20, 30 plus years.
Between $42,500 and $45,000 per year. Again, that's without spending the initial investment. That might not sound like a lot, especially to someone living in a high-cost city or supporting a large family. In those situations, $25,000 to $45,000 per year might barely cover the basics, if that. But for a single person or a couple with a modest lifestyle in a reasonably affordable location, it can be enough to cover essential expenses, especially if you own your home outright and have a low-cost living arrangement. It's not a
Yeah, so that's a big point there that it's a low-cost living arrangement, low-cost living area, and a paid-off house is a very big deal. So those few factors are going to completely swing this one way or the other, most likely for you. So yeah, I'm glad he's mentioning that. But again, we do want to be careful about using that 8.5%, 9% return going forward for a balanced portfolio. If it was 100% equities, we know the S&P 500 geometrically returns about 10% per year. But again, we're not talking 100% equities. He said a balanced portfolio of stocks and bonds. So maybe 70-30, 60-40, something like that. So do you need to be careful? But I think so far this is not totally unreasonable.
lavish income by any stretch, but it can provide a sense of security and consistency. You're not eating out at steakhouses every night or flying first class, but you're also not living paycheck to paycheck or relying on a job you hate just to get by. Most importantly, that kind of income means you're no longer trading your time for money. You get your days back, and for most people, that's the real definition of freedom. This is where the concept becomes powerful. With careful investing, someone could achieve full financial independence with a $500,000 portfolio. No need to grind out 40-hour work weeks just to pay the bills. No need to rely on your next paycheck. Just ongoing income from well-placed capital. He doesn't specifically mention this, but if you factor in Social Security benefits, the financial picture becomes even more comfortable. On average, Social Security provides about $1,900 per month per person, which adds up to roughly $22,800 annually. For a couple each receiving this benefit, that's an additional $45,600 per year in guaranteed income.
Those numbers on the couple seem a little high, the 3,800. I think it's lower than that, like around 3,000 or lower. I'll have to double check that one. I'll put that one on the screen. I can't say for sure if I'm right there. But yeah, I think the per month individually might be accurate, but for a couple, things might change a little bit there. So we'll have to double check that one.
Combined with a solid investment strategy like O'Leary's, it can offer a much more cushioned lifestyle than you might expect on just $500,000 alone. This brings us to a crucial point. Most people aren't really chasing wealth for the sake of luxury, even though they often believe that's their goal. They might think they want fancy cars, designer shoes, the big house, and all the trappings of success. But in reality, they've got it all wrong. What they're really after is freedom. The freedom to choose how they spend their time, whether it's traveling, creating, relaxing, or simply being with family.
Yeah, and I'll say for some people that is they want to spend on luxurious things, or some people do want to have a big house, and there's definitely people who don't give a damn about that. So it really depends on who you're speaking with and what their goals are in retirement. And I think more often than not, it is the financial freedom just to wake up, do what you want, spend time with family, go about your day, do what you want to do, spend your retirement how you want to spend it. So I totally agree with that. It really depends on the person and what exactly they find, most enjoyable and, how they want to spend their days. Because in reality, guys, you only got so many years where you're healthy and, like they say, health is wealth. So, you don't want to just tally up the leaderboard on net worth and then you're in a retirement home. What enjoyment is that really? You got to actually, enjoy and live your healthy years too. And that's a very crucial part, as a financial planner that I think about and I talk about with clients, not just the analytical side of it too.
And what really brings you the most happiness and fulfillment? Is it the flashy material things or the simple, often free moments that actually make life feel rich? Financial independence, no matter how you define it, isn't truly about the money itself. It's about the control and autonomy that money can give you, the ability to live life how you want. O'Leary's advice cuts through the noise of modern financial culture. Rather than focusing on huge windfalls or unrealistic goals, he asked people to think practically. What do you really want your life to look like? How much does that life cost? With careful and smart investing, you can generate much more income than traditional retirement planning suggests, according to O'Leary. When you approach money from this angle, the numbers stop being arbitrary. You're no longer working towards someone else's version of success. You're defining your own and then figuring out how to make it financially sustainable. Of course, none of this works if you're reckless with your money, and O'Leary has strong opinions about where people go wrong. One of his most repeated pieces of advice is to never invest in your brother's restaurant, or bowling alley, or a bar, or as he puts it, all that other crap. According to him, that's how you lose money. He's not trying to be harsh for the sake of it. He's pointing to a very real trend. When people finally save or inherit a large amount of money, they often feel pressure to invest in something exciting with large potential. Or worse, in a friend or relative's dream. But small local businesses, especially in food and entertainment, have extremely high failure rates. They're unpredictable, expensive to operate, and difficult to scale. Unless you have deep experience in that specific industry, investing in one is more like gambling than planning. If you want to live off your money indefinitely, the priority has to be capital preservation, not chasing the next big thing. The point isn't to double your money overnight. The point is to make your money last forever. A word.
So I can't speak on, purchasing into like your family brother's business and how that would pan out. That's not my area of expertise. But when he's saying that your, capital preservation is your biggest goal, you'd obviously want to preserve capital. But when we're talking retirement planning, you also do need to grow your portfolio. So I'm not sure if he's going to get into that anymore, but growing your portfolio is very crucial as well, because if it's just fixed income, obviously inflation is going to eat at that, rates can change, and there could be some other issues as well. He hasn't at all mentioned, sequence of returns risk here. So that is the risk that, when you retire, the market may not perform too well. A lot of times, he mentioned earlier that 8.5%, 9% return. That, let's just take that as it is, as correct, which was a little off, but let's say it's correct. That doesn't mean the market's returning 9% this year, 9% next year, 9% the next year. The market's going to do 10% one year, flat 0% the next year, down 10% the next year, up 20% the next year. There's a sequence of returns there. And the risk is that you start retiring and you get maybe a few bad years. And again, if that happens, you have to have a plan in place to be able to figure out what you're going to do about that, or pre-plan to accompany that. So I'm a little worried that he hasn't included that. And if you have a $500,000 portfolio, you're going to have to really sort of hunker down if that happens, if you do have a few bad years, and that could be detrimental to the long-term portfolio performance. It obviously very depends on the specific needs, but I wish he would have mentioned that little part so far.
Word of caution to add to Kevin's advice. It's important to make sure your investment isn't just holding steady, but actually growing enough to keep pace with inflation. Otherwise, your purchasing power gradually declines. If your account balance remains stuck at $500,000 year after year, even while generating 5 to 9% returns, the income will stay the same, but the cost of living won't. To maintain the same lifestyle over time, your principal should ideally grow by at least 3% annually, so the income it produces also increases and continues to match rising expenses. In a culture obsessed with quick success and flashy investments, it's easy to overlook the power of boring, consistent strategies. But boring works. A balanced mix of fixed income and equities, held for the long term, is one of the most reliable ways to grow and preserve wealth. It's not exciting, it doesn't come with viral headlines or overnight windfalls, but it does offer stability, aside from usual market volatility, and that's what financial independence is built on.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Having a good mix is very crucial. And a lot of times people, they just want to chase all these different crazy investments out there. Even like retirees, they ask me like, hey, what do you think about this crypto thing? Which again, that's nothing I mess with because it's not a regulated, security. But, they ask me about it and I'm just like, I wouldn't even think more about that stuff because, we have stuff that we know performs well and is likely to keep performing well and it will 100% or near 100% get the job done for you. So you don't need to chase the next, the current or whatever hot thing, the next fad. You really want to, stick with what works. And that's often the boring stuff like he mentioned. So I think that's a great point here.
Many people assume that they need to keep climbing, keep pushing, keep chasing larger numbers. But once you've reached a point where your investments can support your lifestyle, you don't need to keep climbing. You can shift into maintenance mode.
Yeah, we call that 1 year syndrome. So I just want to work one more year, one more year. And again, if you have a certain size portfolio, maybe it could be beneficial to work one more year for a lot of different reasons, personal and, financially. But sometimes it does become an issue where it's, at some point you do got to pull the trigger and, retire. So, and that's a whole, that's not just a financial thing, that's an emotional thing as well.
The question isn't how much it takes to be wealthy, it's how much it takes to have enough, and that's a question only you can answer. For some, enough means being able to live in a quiet home with no debt, plenty of time, and the ability to say no to work they don't enjoy. For others, it might mean traveling, building something, or just not having to check their bank account before making a purchase. But no matter how you define it, the takeaway is the same. Once you know your number, you can start building a plan that gets you there. And in many cases, that number is surprisingly achievable. When you cut out impulse purchases and get honest about what you're actually spending your money on, it's eye-opening how far your dollars can go. People who downsize, cook at home, or trade in a finance car for an older one often realize they're not just saving money, they're also gaining a sense of freedom. It's not just about lowering bills, but also about clearing the mental clutter that comes with owning things you don't really need. When you stop spending out of habit or social pressure, your expenses naturally shrink. You don't necessarily need $10 million to live well. In fact, with $500,000 invested wisely, many people could have the kind of stability and freedom they've always wanted. It might not be the kind of wealth that gets you featured in Forbes, but it's the kind that lets you wake up without an alarm clock, and that's a win in itself. Because at the end of the day, that's what real wealth should give you: your time, your choices, and your life.
Yeah, I think that's overall pretty good advice. I mean, at the end of the day, you need to figure out how much you're spending and what exactly your income's going to be, your expenses are going to be in retirement, and how much money you need to weather any storms in retirement. And that's really what we do as financial planners is we figure out, okay, what is that? We run different, simulations with different market conditions to show, okay, what's the probability that this is going to work, this plan. We factor in different things like Social Security, pensions, a bunch of different other things, and we try to figure out, okay, is this a good time for you to retire? But I think overall, it might be generally true that $500,000 could be enough for a lot of people out there. You have to have it to pay off home, maybe a pension, Social Security, things like that. But again, it highly depends on the person, and you do have to consider risk like sequence of returns risk because, just because we've had a good market in the last few years or whatnot, doesn't mean the next few years are going to be good. So how do you mitigate that risk? So a lot of things like that you need to be careful for. And that's where maybe a financial planner could be good for you, is that it is somebody who's done it many times and can make sure it's done correctly. That doesn't mean everyone needs one. Certainly, a lot of people can do very well and you don't need one at all. But if you're somebody who's kind of questioning that, then it might be worth having someone at least double check your blind spots at least. But either way, this is a great video by Chris Invest here. I love the illustrations as well. Awesome job there. Overall, I think this is a really solid video and I'm excited to react to more of his content. Thanks for watching.